Hi, my name is Amy Gentry, and this is my presentation on poverty and its impact on families. What is poverty? We can all articulate what poverty means to us, and many see poverty as relative. I might think poverty is not being able to feed my children. My teenage son, however, may think that because all his friends have a Nintendo Switch, that our family is impoverished because we cannot get him one. The definition used within our human services organizations is being unable to afford a minimum standard of living. How do we define poverty? In this chart, we see three levels of poverty, and many, if not all of us, will see poverty talked about on these three different levels: deep poverty, poverty, and near poverty. You can see the wide disparity from deep poverty to near poverty. And all of these families, no matter which poverty category they're located in, are not able to provide a minimum standard of living for their families. So, how do we define who is impoverished? The official poverty rate, which you find on the left, is calculated by means of the U.S. Census. So workers go out and they gather information about the state of Americans in our country. And with this information, the U.S. Census defines the supplemental poverty measure. And as you can see on the right, these are the factors that go into the supplemental poverty measure: cash resources as well as non-cash benefits. They take into account everyone in the household, related or not. They look at the expenses for basic needs such as food, clothing, shelter, and utilities. Again, it's adjusted to meet the needs of all in the household, not those just related. It also takes into account the different regions that you live within the United States. So someone living in New York City, they would be looked at differently than somebody living in Montgomery, Alabama. Thresholds vary due to type of housing, so those who rent or own a home are looked at differently. And then lastly, the measures of income and the expenses are calculated into the supplemental poverty measure. So when the U.S. Census gets their information, they send it over to the Department of Human Services, and the Department of Human Services calculates their definition of poverty only by cash resources, only individuals who are related that are living together. They use only food prices instead of clothing, shelter, and utilities to determine impoverishment. They do adjust family size, but again, it's only those that are related. It's the same throughout all 48 states, except for Hawaii and Alaska. And it measures only income and not expenses. So, what are our official poverty guidelines? On the right, you see a breakdown of family and someone living that's all related in one household with 8 individuals. If they made $44,000 per year, they would be qualified to apply for the government resources on the left, 1 through 4. The Department of Health and Human Services, Health and Human Services, Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Energy. And these are programs that provide food stamps, SNAP or WIC, adult care food programs, weatherization assistance for low-income families, and school lunch programs. This is a comparison of the two different poverty rates. So you have the official poverty rate in the light green, and then you have the supplemental poverty measure on the right in the darker green. And as you can see, the official poverty rate is much stricter than the supplemental poverty measure, except for those in the child category. And this is because the measures that the government provides, they want those to go more towards families with young children. So how big of a problem do we actually have? Well, for that one family in poverty, we know they have a huge problem. But how many actual huge problems do we have? In the United States, we have 15 million children who live in poverty. That's 21% of all children. And if you take into account the three different levels of poverty that we talked about on the second screen, deep poverty, poverty, and near poverty, then a more accurate index or figure is that 43% of children live in low-income families. And why is that important? Family life and economic status are closely intertwined, and poverty is the single greatest threat to a child's well-being. So, what creates poverty? Labor market issues, education, demographic characteristics, race, poverty-related policies, and social poverty. We'll go over those in a minute, but I had a TED Talk that I wanted to share with you by Mia Birdsong, and she is such a sweet lady that talks about or reemphasizes a lot of the things that Margot has taught us in this class. It's about 30 minutes, and if you have time and would like to look at it, if you click down below it, you will have the pop-up screen to watch it. So, labor market. Most impoverished families have a member that does work. And as you can see from this chart, 94% of people, whether it's voluntary or not, in impoverished families do work. Things that come into play in the labor market are what jobs are available in the area. Someone might not have transportation to get to a job outside of their local community. What do you earn that allows you, or what wages do you have that allows you to get earnings through the government, such as food stamps, Social Security insurance, TANF, which is temporary assistance for non-working families, or cash welfare. What's the unemployment rate in the country? Right now it's really high. Other times it's been lower. And so that plays into whether a family is impoverished or not. And then wages. A family of 4, where they only have one adult worker in the home, 2 kids and a mom. If that dad is working at a job where he only gets minimum wage, how in the world is that dad able to provide a minimum standard of living for his family? Education, our next chart. Here we see how education levels affect economic status. This chart shows information for income level based on educational attainments. So those who have some high school or are a high school graduate, this is the average. And so anywhere from, it could be 20,000 to 32,000 that they bring in per year to support their family. Those with higher degrees, higher learning, they earn higher wages. Our next screen, demographics. And so where you live, urban or rural, male or female, your age and your family makeup affects the poverty rate. As we can see here, again, we're going back to the rural, where unemployment is probably higher, and therefore we have more impoverished families. Resources in these areas are less likely and harder to come by. This chart shows sex and family status, and so in all instances, men make more than women, except for the very last one. We'll talk about that in a minute. With or without children, women earn less than men. This last chart, generally speaking, women who are never married with no children have focused on their career and are able to compete with men in the corporate world, and therefore, based on our intelligence and social emotional skills, we have higher earnings than men. However, generally speaking, again, if a woman is married, widowed, or divorced, she has, in most cases, put her family above career, and therefore her earnings are lower than men's. She's the one who stays home when the kids are sick. She's the one who follows her husband from location to location so he can climb the corporate ladder. He's the one that gets extra schooling, and she is not. And so that also affects income. Demographics, poverty rates based on age and gender. So we can see that men have lower poverty rates across the board than women do. And the children under 5 have the highest poverty rates. And this concerned me. And so I did some extra research and found out that one of the reasons is that these are younger families again, and maybe the breadwinner in the family only works a minimum wage job. Maybe it's a single mom and she has a child, and so she's only able to work part-time. And so as the children get older, and if it's a single mom, she's able to work more hours, then her rate of poverty goes down. Single mom and race. And again, this is reiterating some things that we've seen, but I wanted to pull race into it also. If I could find a chart that included Native American, Alaskan Indians in this, I would have included it. Their poverty rate is the highest among all races. In this particular one, we see that Hispanics have a higher rate of poverty for single moms, and then Black alone, non-Hispanic white. This next chart does show Native Americans in here, and in this one, Native Americans, and then Black alone, Hispanic, white, and Asian. This next chart is an interesting demographic. This shows how much is spent by each income group on the necessities of housing, food, electricity, gasoline or fuel, and clothing. I wanted to show this because the pricing of these items are totally out of control of those people living in the bottom tiers of the economic status. So the red bar, those are our poorest families, followed by the orange and then the yellow. Some of our federal taxing policies are set by the usage of the top 20% of earners. How much to tax electricity use. Also, some of the regulating policies we have in place raise the prices of food, fuel, and housing, making those prices out of reach for many of our families who are impoverished. Social poverty. This is a wonderful podcast by Sarah Halpern Meakin, and in it she talks about the need for connection being more important to some families than commodities. So connection over commodity. As social workers, when we assess families, this is something we need to seek from the family. Sarah Halpern Meakin gives a wonderful podcast on this subject, and if you have time to listen, I highly recommend it. Review of literature. So from the 1600s to present day, America was settled for opportunity and social justice, the right to make one's own decisions and not be oppressed by the monarchy or the church. However, due to human nature of competition and greed, as well as the shaping of thoughts and beliefs acquired in the cultures and environments that different peoples had when immigrating to America, we soon see many of the oppressions that were being fled from are actually becoming the foundation upon the America that we built here in the New World. Elizabethan poor laws. These were followed from England when the settlers first came. an overseer of the community facilitated